Assalamualaikum and hi, my name is Wanisah Isdal and today I will presenting several topics in chapter 8 which is communication.
First, you need to know what is communication. Communication defines as by which information is transmitted and understood between two or more people. Usually works as intended meaning, not just symbols. You can do it by sharing information through verbal and non-verbal communication. Next, the importance of communication. I'm going to elaborate just a few and the rest I hope you elaborate it on your own. For the first point related to organizational behavior, it is to ensure employees' well-being. Employers can use variety of communication channels to increase engagement among that particular department. It is said to be important to communicate regularly with your employees in ways that are meaningful to them, such as giving moral support, ask them how they are doing, and moreover, communication also help individuals and organizations to coordinate work activities. How's that so? By communicating, you will be able to absorb information clearly even though you use non-verbal communication. Thus, you can come up with strategies on what to do and what not to do. Next, communication is important for organizational learning and decision making. Without communication, decision cannot be made as people do not know what are you thinking. That is why communication is there to help you make a better decision. When you discuss potential factors associated with the decision, you have the opportunity to bring new organizational members into the fold, which leads to organizational learning. In an organization, communication serves four purposes, namely control, motivation, expression, and technology of information. In control, organizations have rules and policies that employees must follow, communicated to workers to keep order and equity operating within the system. In motivation, goals, feedbacks, and reinforcement are among those items communicated to employees to improve their performance and stimulate motivation. Emotional expression, on the other hand, means by which employees expressing themselves, air their grievances, and interact socially. It is primary source of social interaction. Lastly, information in technology, meaning that organizations keep their employees informed of their goals, industry information, new developments, and technology in order that they can do their jobs correctly and efficiently. Moving on to the process model, as you can see down below, this is the communication process model. The sender will send you a message and encode into forms of messages through various of channel mediums, such as phones and letters. The receiver will decode the messages and will give response and come back to the sender, in which they will give feedback, whether that is the response that they wanted it to be. In the middle of the process, you can see noise section. It doesn't have to be the outside noise, such as birds chirping or the sound of people renovating a house, but noise can also include in languages and many more barriers, which I will explain further in the next slide. The last part of this slide is how to improve communication, coding, and decoding. Both parties must have motivation and ability to communicate through the channel mediums. Next, both parties must carry the same code book, meaning that both of you have the same particular words that can be understood with each other. Kelantanis to Kelantanis, Sabahan to Sabahan. Differences create breakdown in communication, which mean chaos. The third one is both parties are advisable to share similar mental models of the communication context, meaning behavior and perception. And lastly, sender is experienced at communicating the message, topic, and not solely jump into a random conversation outside both parties' preference.
Communication channels. Communication channels refers to the methods that has used to communicate as well as the specific tools that used in communication process. There are two types of communication channels, which are verbal communication and non-verbal communication. We will see each of the points of these two types of communication channels. Firstly is verbal communication. Verbal communication is our everyday conversation. The average we use verbal communication is 70 until 80% of our active time communicating verbally. Verbal communication is like listening, speaking, reading, and writing, where we can know that the sender wants to convey the message. In verbal communication, there are two types of verbal communication, which are electronic communication and social network communication. Next, we will continue with electronic communication. The electronic communication can be defined as the communication which use electronic media to transmit the information or message using computer, email, telephone, video calling, and fax machine. So one of the electronic communication is workplace email. So Hayward executive introduced Home Week each month, in which they must not travel. This initiative has helped them rediscover the benefit of face-to-face rather than email communication. Now, we will see how email has altered communication. Firstly, at previous, when coordinating work, we must do that manually by face-to-face with all staff. But now, email is a preferred medium for coordinating work. Second is tends to increase communication volume. So if before, when we have an information that we not understand, we can ask directly. But since have email, it tends to increase communication volume because maybe many things that we not understand and must ask repeatedly. Thirdly is significantly alter communication flow. Usually, communication was made by face-to-face with the person, but by this email is changed because with email we can make a conversation with our friends. Last but not least is reduce some selective attention bias. When the communicating is through by email, especially for those who find job, these channels will help them because it can hide our physical background, such as our race, age, weight, and other observable characteristics. Now, we will see how email has altered communication. Firstly, at previous, when coordinating work, we must do that manually by face-to-face with all staff. But now, email is a preferred medium for coordinating work. Second is tends to increase communication volume. So if before, when we have an information that we not understand, we can ask directly. But since have email, it tends to increase communication volume because maybe many things that we not understand and must ask repeatedly. Thirdly is significantly alter communication flow. Usually, communication was made by face-to-face with the person, but by this email is changed because with email we can make a conversation with our friends. Last but not least is reduce some selective attention bias. When the communicating is through by email, especially for those who find job, these channels will help them because it can hide our physical background, such as our race, age, weight, and other observable characteristics. However, they are also have a problem with email, where when communication through the email, they communicate emotion poorly because we can only read but do not can share our reaction face to them. Second is reduce politeness and respect. Because of they very hard to meet each other, there will be lack of diplomacy among them. So when that happen, it will reduce politeness and respect each other. Next is inefficient for ambiguous, complex, novel situation, where they do not know what happened in surrounding, and if they know, it's late. Lastly, will increase information overload. So when we use email, automatically all message that was linked with our email will just enter, so it will make information overload, so that they must screening and cleaning the message. Second is social networking communication. Social network communication cluster people around who expertise and interest. There are several types of social network communication. Firstly, Facebook, MySpace, and Link, where they can showcasing artists and their works. because mostly individual who interest and expert with social network communication more creative. So designer, photographer and maybe musician too will collaborate with their audience. Second is online discussion forums, avatar sites, instant messaging, wikis or Wikipedia that anyone in the group can write, edit and remove the material. Second channel's communication is non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication is action and facial gesture. Non-verbal communication also influence meaning of verbal symbols such as sign language, symbols used for the deep and dumb. Non-verbal communication also less rule-bound than verbal communication. It plays the role of emotion because the important part of emotional labor. This body language or facial body are kept suddenly without any meaning, and it makes most is automatic and non-conscious. Emotional contagion. Emotional contagion is referred to the automatic process of sharing another person's emotion by mimicking their facial expression and other non-verbal behavior. There are some three purposes for do emotional contagion. Firstly, provide continuous feedback to speaker, increases emotional understanding of the other person's experience, and lastly, to communicate a collective sentiment by sharing the experience. There are two channels to choosing the best communication channels, which is social acceptance and media richness. So now we will see how well the communication channels is approved and supported by the organization, teams and individual. The first criteria is communication channel norms that we use every day like WhatsApp, Telegram and Facebook. Second is more to individual communication channels preference. If they use WhatsApp, we also use WhatsApp. Thirdly is symbolic meaning of the communicating channels. Determine event and best channels to transmit information. For instance, like us now in audio session, we use media social platform like WhatsApp and Telegram to transmit information. While media richness is the channel's data carrying capacity needs to be aligned with the communication activity. Usually, we can say that high richness when channels are convey multiple clues, allow timely feedback, allow customized message, and permit complex symbols. These media richness are used rich communication media when the situation is not routine and ambiguous. So, by looks the hierarchy of media richness, we can conclude that the more faster the response received from the person communicating, the more higher the media richness.
Hello, so as I have mentioned earlier, these are the communication of barriers, which consists of filtering, information overload, language, and perception. Filtering, or known as selective attention, meaning by distorting or withholding information to manage a person's fraction. Many people sometimes manipulate information to make it appear more favorable even if it affects decision making. For example, a CEO secretary may withhold some important information and not let it reach him. This can be happen due to several reasons, and the most prominent one is fear. Past experience is also one of the selected filtering in communication. People use their past experiences to select whether to filter communication or not. For example, if the sender was rewarded in the past for sending such news, then it is fine to send it. Otherwise, the sender will filter it if the sender was punished for sending such news in the past. Another barrier to communication is unchecked inflow of information. When people are bogged down with too much information, they are likely to make errors. They will also delay processing or responding to information, at least for some time. And delay may become a habit, causing serious communication problems. When the information received exceeds a person's capacity to get through it, then the information will be overloaded, thus the person will be misinterpreted the information. Next barriers is language. For the first one, ambiguity, which also means uncertainty. Words that sound the same but have a different meaning may express an entirely different perspective. The receiver must then ensure that the same meaning is interpreted by the sender. It is safer if those terms are stopped wherever possible by using alternatives. Jargons, on the other hand, are terms used by professionals to simplify a particular concept. Jargons are meant to enhance communication, but at times it can act as the biggest barrier to communication. If someone is unaware of what the term someone is using means, then they are likely to lose concentration. Jargon can be a serious communication problem. Some people see it as a form of technical snobbery that can prevent employers from knowing crucial knowledge. Last but not least is perception barriers. Perception barriers are the mental blocks that we create because of the perceptions that we have of certain people, situations, or events around us. It occurs because we all perceive things differently based on each individual's unique experience. The perceptual process determines what messages we select or screen out, as well as how the selected information is organized and interpreted. Thus, if the sender's and receiver's perceptions are not aligned, it can be a significant source of barrier in the communication process.
The second topic that I will present is cross-cultural and gender communication. We will go through one by one. Firstly, cross-cultural communication. What meaning of cross-cultural communication? Cross-cultural communication refers to the communication between people who have differences in any one of the following with their style of working, age, nationality, ethnicity, races, and gender. But cross-cultural communication can also refer to the attempts that are made to exchange, negotiate, and mediate culture differences by means of language, gesture, and body language, or known as verbal and non-verbal. There are two types of cross-culture communication, which are verbal and non-verbal differences. So, the verbal differences firstly is language. Why language can be one of the verbal differences? It is because the same words can mean different things to people from different cultures, even when they speak the same language. When the language are different and translation has to be used to ensure no misunderstanding happens. So, language differences is potential for misunderstanding increases. Second is voice intonation. Every person have differences voice intonation when talk following their culture communication, because there are some people talk with their high tones voice when talking, and they also have a small and slow voice when talking. Every culture has a different speaking style. The differences of voice intonation will bring a various meaning so that misunderstanding will happen. Lastly is silent or conversational overlaps. This type of culture verbal differences will bring the empathy and respect sense to them. This happens when we have a differences language. We will not speak each other because we scare if misunderstanding happen. So, they refer to be silent to avoid any misunderstanding, because they still respect and have empathy sense in themselves, but by to be silent, it will make them lack of communication. Second type of cross-cultural communication is non-verbal differences. Firstly is interpreting non-verbal meaning. Body language and gesture that we show to people do not guarantee that the meaning we convey to someone is same with their think. Every culture has their own body language and gesture that they understand with culture language. It's really hard to interpreting non-verbal meaning if you not understand their culture language. For example, in Australia, a coworker asked Patricia Oliveira why she laughed when he gave the thumbs up that everything is okay. She explained that this gesture means something not very nice in her home country, in Brazil. After hearing this, several coworkers gave the boss a lot more thumbs up sign. Next is importance of verbal versus non-verbal communication. Conversation between different races and culture will bring different meaning if they do not understand well each other's language. If the message is conveyed non-verbally, it certainly does not bring the same meaning of the same message. There are more disadvantages than advantages of non-verbal communication. To avoid misunderstanding happens, it is important to use verbal communication to make sure what we telling to them they can understand. Therefore, it is the importance of verbal communication either in writing or speaking compared to non-verbal communication. Next is gender communication differences. How can gender communication be differences? Because when growing up, boys and girls are often segregated, restricting to them to socialize solely with individuals of their own gender, learning a distinct culture as well as their gender norm. This results in differences in communication between men and women, including both gender to communicate for contrasting reasons. So, to more understand with this topic, look this table differences between men and women. So, firstly, when men meet up with their friends, they always talking about report talk. But when women meet, they always are talking like rapport talk that is more to relationship. Second, if men meet up with their friends, their conversation is like negotiation of status. But if girls, it's different because their conversation is like bonding events. A man is less sensitive to non-verbal cues because they're more chill than women. While women, if their close friend is silent, they will be panicked and worried. So that's why woman is more sensitive to non-verbal cues. Men is more brave than woman when giving advice because their personality is like that. When they give advice, is quickly and directly. But women not give advice directly because they worried if their friends misunderstanding.
Next is improving interpersonal communication between the senders and the receivers. As you can see, there are two circles. First circle, which is the outside, is for the sender, while in the middle is for the receiver. Let us look at the first cycle, which is how to get your message across, mainly prepared for the sender. For the first one, you must be emphasized, meaning that you must understand and share the feelings of another through what they are experiencing. It involves emotions. You cannot simply start a conversation within their frame or reference that is something sensitive. Being empathized can enable you to resolve conflicts as you are really aware of the emotions, thus it helps you build more productive teams and improve relationship among co-workers in an organization. Moving on to the next point, which is to repeat the message. In terms of communication, repeating a message leads to familiarity, which leads to making a preference. Not necessarily repeating a message over and over again at a time, but however, repeating a message more than once may be more effective in getting someone to take action because they can develop a preference for it. For the third one is by using time effectively. Time is an integral part of communication. Communication on time adds value to one's opinion. For instance, if you have a great idea during a meeting and you want yours to be heard by your manager, you may get a terrible response. But if you choose another day, you will get great response. It simply shows that people are more receptive at some times compared to the other times. Last but not least, you must be descriptive, meaning that putting an information in detail so that the receivers can successfully evaluate the message without having any misunderstandings. Now let's take a look at the receiver section in the middle of the cycle. How to be an active listener. Active listener include evaluating the messages, be emphasized by avoiding sensitive responses as well as organizing the information given well. Next, active listening also involves responding messages to the sender. You may show some interest by asking questions. And last but not least, is sensing, which means to postpone your evaluation, avoid giving any interruptions, and keep on maintaining interest. And the cycle goes on and on.
Lastly is communication through grapevine. Organizational grapevine refer to an unstructured and informal network founded on social relationship rather than organizational charts or job description. You guys already know and familiar with the word of grapevine, right? So now we will see the terms of communication through grapevine. Firstly is transmit information rapidly in all directions. Communication through grapevine will make the information spread quickly everywhere because the information has conveyed from one person to another person by follow a cluster chain. Second is follow a cluster chain pattern. A person tells the information to the selected person who may in turn relay the information to other selected person. Most of the information communication follow the chain. Next is more active in homogeneous groups. The information that has shared only for who same homogeneous group because they will not shy to share what they know to other who same homogeneous group with them. Lastly is transmit some degree of truth. Since the information presented is from the one person to another person by follow cluster chain, for sure there will be some of that are as original or pure information, and mostly the information has been recreated. Next is benefit of communication through grapevine. Firstly is fill in missing information from formal source. The information that will send to first line must perfectly. So by this communication through grapevine, all the missing information will be filled in from formal source to make sure the information is perfectly. Second is strengthen corporate culture. Communication through grapevine is one of cultural in all companies. If this culture not have, the staff will be more hard because they need to do alone. That's why the one of benefit of communication through grapevine is strengthens corporate culture. Next is relieve anxiety among the person. Communication through grapevine also can relieve anxiety among the person because of the information that has followed the cluster chain. Lastly is signal that problem exists. However, communication through grapevine also has their own limitation. The limitation includes, firstly, distortions might escalate anxiety and perceived lack of concern for employees when company info is lower than grapevine.